Let's talk about a fascinating and really important legal idea called vicarious liability. Can a company actually be sued for a mistake one of its employees makes? Well, that's exactly what this is all about, and today we are going to break it down. Here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get a solid definition of what vicarious liability even is. Then we'll jump into the classic employer-employee relationship. We'll even look at how this applies to the government itself. After that, we'll get into the tricky world of independent contractors, and then we'll wrap it all up with a quick review of the most important takeaways. All right, let's dive right into our first section, defining vicarious liability. You can think of this as the bedrock of indirect responsibility in the eyes of the law. So, what on earth is vicarious liability? Legally speaking, it's a principle where one person is held responsible for the wrongful actions of another person, all because of a special relationship between them. The simple way to think about it, it's being held responsible for someone else's mistake. Now, normally, you're only on the hook for your own actions, right? But this whole idea kind of flips that on its head. And a big reason for it is practical. The person in charge, like an employer, is usually in a better financial position to actually compensate a victim. This whole concept is built on a couple of very old legal sayings or maxims. The first is qui facit per alium facit per se. That's a mouthful, but it just means he who acts through another is deemed in law to do it himself. The second one, Respondeat Superior, is a bit more direct. Let the principal be held responsible. See, they both point to the exact same idea. Responsibility flows uphill. Okay, now that we've got the basic principle down, let's look at where you see this pop up most often. In the relationship between an employer and an employee, or what the law traditionally calls a master and servant relationship. So for an employer to be held liable, a plaintiff has to prove two essential things. First, they've got to show that the person who did the wrong thing was, in fact, an employee. And second, and this is absolutely crucial, the wrongful act had to have happened while they were actually doing their job. This is what the law calls being in the course of employment. Let's look at a landmark case to see this in action. Lloyd versus Grace Smith and Company. So here's what happened. A law firm's clerk conned a client into signing away her property for his own personal profit. The big question for the court was, could the firm be held responsible for its employees' fraud? And the answer was a resounding yes. You see, even though the clerk was acting completely dishonestly, he was doing it within the scope of the authority the firm had given him. This is a huge takeaway. An employer can be liable even for an employee's intentional wrongdoing as long as it's connected to their job. And this is where things can get a little complicated. For instance, what happens when one company lends an employee to another? Who's the boss then? And what about highly skilled professionals, like surgeons in a hospital? Does the hospital really control them enough to be liable for their mistakes? Let's unpack these tricky scenarios. In a case involving a crane driver who was hired out for the day, the court had to figure out who was responsible for his negligence. Was it his permanent employer or the company that was just borrowing him? The court decided it was the permanent employer, and the reason why is so important, because they still had the ultimate power of control. They could tell him how to do his job, even if someone else was telling him what to do. This case really shows that control is the name of the game. Now let's look at that hospital scenario. In the Cassidy case, a patient's hand was permanently damaged because of negligent care after an operation. The hospital tried to argue it wasn't responsible for the actions of its highly skilled medical staff, but the court completely disagreed. It said that hospitals have a fundamental duty of care to their patients, a duty they cannot just pass off to someone else. For the safety of patients, doctors and nurses are considered part of the hospital's organization, which means the hospital is liable for their negligence. But hold on, an employer isn't always on the hook. There are limits. For example, if an employee does something completely unrelated to their job, or something they were specifically told not to do, like a bus conductor deciding to take the wheel and drive the bus, the employer is off the hook. The act has to be reasonably connected to what they were hired to do. The State Bank of India case is a perfect illustration of this. A woman gave some money to a bank employee, who also happened to be a friend, at his home so he could deposit it for her. He kept the money. So, was the bank liable? The court said no. Why? Because the whole transaction happened outside the bank, in a friendly capacity. It wasn't considered part of his employment. The context and location of the act really mattered here. Here's another really clear example. A bus conductor decided he'd try his hand at driving the bus, and he ended up crashing it. Now, his job was to collect tickets, not operate a massive vehicle. Because he was acting so far outside the scope of his duties, his employer was not held liable. This is what lawyers sometimes call an employee going on a frolic of his own. So we've covered private companies, but what about the biggest employer of them all? The government. Can you actually sue the state for what its employees do? This brings us to the very complex idea of sovereign immunity. Historically, the guiding principle was an old maxim, rex non postus pecare, which means the king can do no wrong. Basically, you couldn't sue the government, period. But in modern democracies, that idea has changed a lot. In India, for instance, Article 300 of the Constitution explicitly says the government can sue and be sued. But as we're about to see, there's still some pretty big exceptions. The key distinction that courts have drawn is between sovereign and non-sovereign functions. Think of sovereign functions as the core duties only a state can perform, things like running the military, making laws, or policing the streets. For these acts, the state generally still has immunity. But for non-sovereign functions, things a private company could also do, like running a business or a transport service, the state can be held liable. As you can imagine, that line can get pretty blurry, and that's where a lot of legal battles happen. A really important case here is State of Rajasthan versus Vidyawadi. A government jeep, driven by a state employee, was involved in a fatal accident. The state tried to claim sovereign immunity, but the Supreme Court said, not so fast. They made it clear that in a modern welfare state, the government can't just hide behind outdated rules meant for kings. Driving a jeep is a normal, everyday activity, a non-sovereign function, so the state was held liable, just like any other employer. But now let's look at the flip side with a custody law case. In this situation, the police seized some gold during an investigation, and one of the officers stole it. This time, the court said the state was not liable. So why the different outcome? Because the act of seizing property was considered a core police power, a sovereign function. This just goes to show how fine that line between sovereign and non-sovereign acts can really be. Okay, we've got a handle on employees. But what about people who aren't employees, like freelancers or independent contractors? If you hire a plumber to fix a leak and they end up flooding your neighbor's apartment, are you responsible? Let's get into the rules for independent contractors. So, this is the million-dollar question. Is an employer ever liable for what an independent contractor does? Generally speaking, the answer is no. In fact, that's often why companies hire contractors in the first place. But, and you knew there was a but coming, there are some really important exceptions to this rule. So while the general rule is no liability, there are situations where you simply can't pass the buck. For example, if you hire a contractor to do something that's illegal, you're definitely on the hook. And in certain high-risk situations, the law says you have a non-delegable duty. That's a fancy way of saying it's a responsibility you absolutely cannot hand off to someone else. The case of Terry versus Ashton is a classic example of this. A homeowner hired a contractor to fix a heavy lamp that was hanging over a public sidewalk. Well, the contractor did a poor job, and the lamp later fell and injured someone walking by. The owner tried to blame the contractor, but the court said no. The duty to make sure your property is safe for the public is non-delegatable. The owner was held liable, proving that some responsibilities you just can't outsource. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. Let's pull it all together in our final section. We'll quickly go over the key distinctions one more time to make sure these core concepts are locked in. This table really helps break down the differences between an employee, a servant, and an independent contractor. But honestly, it all boils down to one simple word: control. An employee works under your direct control using your tools on a contract of service. A contractor, on the other hand, works independently using their own tools on a contract for a service. The more control you have over how the work gets done, the more likely that person is an employee, and the more likely you are to be vicariously liable. So let's do a super quick recap. Vicarious liability is all about the relationship. An employer is on the hook for what an employee does in the course of their employment. The government is liable for its commercial or non-sovereign acts, and while you're usually safe with contractors, some duties just can't be delegated. At its heart, this doctrine is about making sure victims of a wrong can get justice from the party best able to provide it. But it leaves us with a really fascinating question for today. In our modern gig economy, with so much complex subcontracting, where do we draw the line between an employee and a contractor? And who should ultimately bear the risk?